timing. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for coming. Well, you haven't really come anywhere, have you? You're probably all just sitting at home, lounging around in your pajamas. But I can see a few people out there, so that's good to see. Thanks for coming, for perhaps logging in to the talk. Today, I want to talk about current trends in language assessment. So I'd like to thank Christine and Melanie and the team for inviting me to give this talk. There are a lot of things I'm going to try and get through in the next 45 minutes. I want to look at multiple measures assessment. I want to look at authentic assessment, integrated skills assessment, learning-oriented assessment. I want to look at rater bias and finish up with something that's quite topical, and that is how to minimize cheating during online exams. So I'm going to go quite quickly, so you have to concentrate and keep concentrating all the way through. So let's start off with multiple measures assessment. Now, this is not something that is new, but it is something that that people have been aware of for quite a long time. But I think it's something that needs reinforcing these days. The definition of multiple measures assessment is the use of multiple indicators and sources of evidence of students' learning of varying kinds, gathered at multiple points in time within and across subject areas. So the opposite would be a single measure, a single assessment of a course at the end of the course, and one final exam, and that's it. So the multiple measures is the opposite of that. It's having many assessments, different kinds of assessments with different question types throughout at different points in a course. It can be used to determine students' readiness for university study. So if you're trying to get into university, they won't just look at your grades, they will look at your GPA, SAT test results, entrance essays some universities ask for, or in an interview. In our context, it's more to determine students' learning on a particular course. So we have a final exam, but we mix it up with a midterm, project, presentations, and portfolios. The advantages of using multiple measures as opposed to one single large measure is that it gives a much broader measure of students' learning. It allows students to demonstrate learning in different ways. So students learn in different ways. There are different learning styles, and not all students perform equally well on the different test methods. Some students like to do multiple choice questions, some students don't. Some students like presentations, some don't. Some like essays, some do. So, instead of just having one type of measure, having a range of measures allows students to show their learning in different ways. And as I mentioned earlier, at multiple times during a course. It reduces test method bias. So if you just have one final exam, I remember when we used to do the old TOEFL at ZU years and years ago, and it was all multiple choice. There was definitely, I witnessed a lot of times students had a problem with the multiple choice method. Some students didn't like it, and when they would speak to me, I go, no doubt about it, you're going to get a 550 on this IELTS for sure, and they get a 490, and they get a 490 6 times in a row. It was the test method that was biasing them. Having a range of assessments that are weighted less reduces test anxiety, and of course, lots of tests can motivate students. I'm always using small tests to motivate students, and students don't seem to worry too much that it's only worth 2%. They think a test that's worth 2% is as important as a test that's worth 15%, and it motivates them. You can use assessment to facilitate learning, and the teacher can use the results to adapt a course. I'm just going to have a look at the chat there, because let's say someone's saying something important now. Someone just smiled. Okay. Or someone's laughing. That's even better. Okay, chat box, move out of the way. Multiple measures assessment in practice. Assessing students at numerous points during a course, assessing multiple skills. So not just writing, but also reading, writing, listening, speaking, vocabulary and grammar. And also assessing the sub-skills. So for reading, skimming, scanning, guessing the meaning of vocabulary from context, and paraphrasing, summarizing. That's something I'm doing with my students right now. assessing, paraphrasing, and summarizing, and then moving to something more advanced, synthesizing. I mean, this is a skill that students need to have at university. Students read different sources, they listen to lectures, and they have to synthesize that information into a presentation or a writing. And the assessing of integrated skills, which I'll talk about later on. Multiple measures uses a range of different assessment types: quizzes, progress tests, exams, projects, time writing, process writing, case studies, reports, portfolios, academic discussions, presentations. There's not just one assessment type that you have to use. Different question types, multiple choice, true, false. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of true, false, because it's either true or false. You've got a 50% chance of getting it correct. Or people add true, false, or not mentioned. I think that's a really weird thing to ask a student. Is this mentioned in a text? It's very inauthentic. And I'm going to move on to talk about authenticity in a second. So I'm not a big fan of true, false, but comprehension questions, yes. Matching, table completion, labeling diagrams, completing flowcharts, referencing, and short answer questions and long answer questions. Good morning, May. And using different groups. So sometimes I do individual assessment. At the moment, I'm doing small group assessment with groups of 3, pair assessment, mixing it all up and spreading the weighting of the assessment. So it's all not, the final exam's not worth 50%. The final exam's worth, well, I think I've got an example here. Here's an example of multiple measures. The final exam's worth 10. The midterm was worth 10. And there was a range of other assessments that I used, progress tests throughout the course. That was short little, you could almost say quizzes. Could you please send us your email in the chat box? I will do. Integrated skills assessment, I've got 2 of those, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute. Group project, a presentation. Students love presentations. Students are good at presentations. An academic discussion, a portfolio, a collection of their work. Not just writing, but it could be a reading portfolio and a listening portfolio. I've given over here, because I'm a nice guy, I've given 10% to the teacher assessment, handing it over to the teacher and saying, it's up to you to do whatever you want with this 10%. You can decide what to do. And then a midterm and then a final. So mixing up there with a range of different assessment, multiple measures, multiple types of assessment, using multiple assessment types, so that we're not disadvantaging students. Is it a word? Disadvantaging? I think it's a word. And giving students plenty of opportunity to demonstrate what they can do, which is what assessment's all about. And I think it needs to be reinforced. We need to go back and think, do we have enough multiple measures here? Or is our final exam worth 40% or 60%? It's too much, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm a big fan of multiple measures and reinforcing that and putting it back in. And there's because there's this kind of a neat cartoon here that summarizes this. One size doesn't fit all. Not all. Climbing the tree, that's the assessment, but that might not be fair to everyone to demonstrate their ability. Because obviously the fish is going to have a bit of trouble doing that, and the elephant we might push it over and then climb it that way. So the monkey is advantaged there. Okay, so I've mentioned this already, authentic assessment. Excuse me, so this is point number 2. And I'm a big fan. I've been promoting authentic assessment for a long time. What is authentic assessment? Does anybody know? Anybody know what authentic assessment is? No, okay. Oh, that's good, Bjorn. You're going to know in a couple of seconds. Anybody want to turn on their mic and shout out the answer there? This is like my regular teaching of every day. Is anybody there?
I will, Pete.
Thanks.
Authentic assessment is where your assessment mirrors real-world tasks or tasks that the student would have to do in real life.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine. almost as well as I said in 2009 here. Authentic assessments require the test taker to show that they are able to complete a particular task that is similar to a task that they are likely to do in the target situation. So an authentic assessment for a lifeguard is not sitting down and answering multiple choice questions. An authentic assessment for a lifeguard is go out and rescue that person that's drowning out there. You know, you got to swim out with their little thing on, and you know, do a Baywatch diving through the water and bring them back, and you know, and bring them back to life. Someone's just written something here, which can really give learners an opportunity to show their skills of it. I think, yeah, Bjorn's Huddy, sorry, is talking about the multiple measures. So authentic assessment is all about, you know, thinking about what are students going to have to do in the real world situation, and using assessment that mirrors that, as Christine just said. So for us, most of us are preparing students for university, to study at university. So we need to go back a little bit and say, what do university students actually do? So we went back and we looked at, you know, what do students actually have to do at university? Well, they have to understand lectures and take notes. Yeah, they have to read academic texts and they have to take notes. And then they have to do a little bit of research and they have to take notes. So taking notes is a vitally important skill that our students need to do. Then they need to synthesize these notes, which I just mentioned earlier on, and to give some kind of oral presentation or some kind of or written work, an assignment, a case study, or an essay. That's what students need to do. So we need to, and authentic assessments would mirror these kind of activities, okay? It's also going back to Gardner and Nesi's genre families, and they looked at what kind of writing do students actually do at university, and their work was very interesting, and they sort of divided up into 5 different purposes: demonstrating knowledge and understanding, and the types of writing that included was providing explanations. And doing exercises. Students do a lot of exercises in class. Do we teach students how to do exercises? I mean, that's kind of an interesting question. Right now, I'm teaching my students, I'm teaching an advanced writing class in the majors, and I'm teaching students how to do an extended definition, which is like an explanation. So it's a good thing to get them to learn to do. But do we teach them how to do exercises? Because that's what they do in the majors. The second primary purpose was developing powers of reasoning. So in this genre, Gardner and Nesi identified essays and critiques as being the type of writing that they have to do there. Building research skills. So students need to write literature surveys, methodology recounts, and research reports. So these are the kind of things that we need to prepare students to be doing in our pre-sessional language courses, if we want them to succeed at university. Preparing for professional practice, case studies. At the moment, I'm teaching technical writing, and we're doing quite a few case studies. And I know, and I've taught courses in the IT department in technical, and not just technical writing courses, but actual IT courses. And they do a lot of case studies. I was teaching ethics in IT, and it was pretty much all case studies, you know, and we need to prepare students for that. Design specifications for art and graphic design students, interior design students, problem questions and proposals. That's one of the things that we're preparing our students to do in the technical writing course that I'm doing at the moment. We're teaching them how to write proposals, because that's the kind of thing that they're going to have to do in the future. Another thing that we're teaching them how to do is write instruction manuals and user guides and troubleshooting guides. You know, when you read something and there's a troubleshooting guide, a technical writer wrote that. It's not on Gardner's and Nesi's list here. Writing for oneself and others, event recounts and public engagement. So we need to go to lists like this, and there are others, where people have studied and researched what students do at university, and we need to teach that, not what we think students do at university. Authentic assessment has high content validity. It integrates skills, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Assessment is contextualized and meaningful. It's formative. It assesses higher order thinking skills. That's very important. It's not, assessing, can the student skim and scan and answer this multiple choice question from a reading? Because students at university are probably not going to really do that very often. In the majors, teachers don't give out a reading and say, right, answer these multiple questions about the reading. Teachers give out a reading and say, right, read this and read this and read this, and then add it to my lecture notes and write something, and write an essay about that. Higher face validity, positive washback, and I think it's a much better predictor of future performance. If you can train your student, if your course uses authentic assessment, and it uses a lot of assessment that replicates what students are going to do in the real world in their courses, then it's going to be a really good predictor of performance. There's disadvantages too, though, however. It can be time consuming for sure. A lot of those assessment tasks take a lot of time to set up. Obviously, it's subjective, and I'm going to talk about rater bias later on, that the rating becomes very subjective. The human element, the human rater. So we have a lower scoring reliability, but there's ways to improve that. Varied test conditions, but I don't see that as really being that much of a disadvantage. We've lost control of the test conditions a little bit. It could have lower face validity. And if a students fail an authentic assessment, it can be a little bit difficult to determine why they failed it, because the assessment's such a large thing. I've got a little comment here from Amina. Thanks, Amina. But in foundation courses, we don't know which to. Now that's a good point, Amina. That's a good point. So what we can do is we can prepare them for general academic English. Or what we're doing at the moment is, I mentioned earlier that I'm teaching an advanced writing course, and it's for students. So we follow the American system, where we have a 2-year general education program and then 2 years of their majors. Well, it might be 2.5 really. So I'm teaching an advanced writing course that's in the 2nd year of the general education course. And I mentioned earlier that I'm teaching explanations. So what the students choose their own explanations and concepts to define, and they come from their majors. So the students are concurrently doing introductory to majors courses. So my art students are choosing art technical terms. So even though it's a general academic class and academic purposes class, we can try and make it specialized to their major. And there's no reason why these kind of courses couldn't be made up of students, with business students in one group and IT students in another and science students in another. Thanks for the comment. Now, let's move on to integrated skills assessment. And this might sort of answer your question a little bit more, Amina. Let me have another sip of water. It's thirsty work. Integrated skills assessment is something that I've been going on about for a long time, because when I was at Reading University, Cyril Weir was the professor there, and Cyril Weir was championing this idea of integrated skills assessment. I think he was the first person to talk about it. So the opposite of an integrated skills assessment is an impromptu writing task, where you walk into class, or you give the students a test and you say, okay, here's a cold prompt. You've never seen this prompt before. You don't know anything about it. You've never studied it. It's an area that you're not that familiar about. And it's like the thing you get on IELTS task 2. Here's a prompt, and where you go, right. And that's the way we assess writing. Well, there's a lot of things wrong with this impromptu writing task. And we might even do it in our final exams at the end of the year. We give the students a writing task and say, write about this. And they have no knowledge about it. They haven't seen it before, and they don't know much about it. It lacks authenticity, and it lacks complexity, the complexity of a real world task. It lacks what we would call cognitive validity. Cognitive validity is the extent to which the task resembles a real world academic task. So it could be, he could have called it authentic validity. Yeah, it lacks context validity in that its context validity is related to the performance conditions such as time and length and criteria. I mean, an impromptu task is 30 minutes. It's 500 words long, and it's marked using a certain criteria. That's not the kind of writing that students do in the real world. They do a writing task that lasts 3 or 4 weeks. It's 1,500 words long, and they read and they research and they maybe get lectures about it and they synthesize all that information. So there's a lot of lacks context validity. It's knowledge telling rather than knowledge transforming. So for Weir, he talks about a reading into writing summary task types represent more closely the cognitive processing and knowledge base required for writing activities beyond the test. So here's some examples of what an integrated skills assessment looks like. For a lot of people, it is just the top one. It's just reading into writing. So it's perhaps reading 2 texts and then it's writing an essay about that. And that's something that we used to do at Zayed University. Instead of using the impromptu task, that the students didn't know anything about, we gave them 2 or 3 reading texts about a certain topic. And then later on, we added a listening as well. And then the students took notes on all that information, and then they produced a writing assignment. So that's way more integrated. It could be a listening into a speaking, or it could be a listening and a reading into a writing, as I just described. Or it could be a listening and a reading into a writing and a speaking. Or it could be a listening and a reading and doing a little bit of research, which is what students do at university, and then turning that into a writing and a speaking assessment. So the last one is the most authentic there. And it's the most integrated as well. Why use integrated skills tests? They're more authentic, they have greater context validity, they have greater cognitive validity, they're knowledge transforming. You're transforming knowledge and putting it in and synthesizing it and transforming it into something different, rather than just telling what you know about, which is pretty menial. It focuses on the genre of writing that students actually write. So things like a position essay, that's the kind of writing that students will write at university. Not a problem solution essay, not a cause and effect essay. And things like case studies, reports, reflections. These are the types of writing tasks, going back to the Gardner and Nesi thing. These are the types of writing that students actually have to do. And it's a better representation of what communication is. More advantages of, why use an integrated skills test? It better reflects what and how we teach. It improves construct validity. It broadens the whole testing construct. It has positive consequential validity or washback effect. It has a good washback effect. So what you're teaching, what you're assessing is what the students are learning in class, which is meaningful, rather than just cramming or preparing for a test. And it aligns with learning-oriented assessment, which I'm going to talk about at the end, and it has better predictive validity. Okay, there are a lot of challenges involved with integrated assessment. Obviously, there's tradition and there's resistance because it's not the way it was done, and we've always separated the skills, or we've done it this way, and there could be resistance. Students might not expect something as big as this. They're used to reading a text and answering multiple choice questions. The reporting of results could be problematic. In the UK, to get a visa, for some bizarre reason, students need to demonstrate a four skills profile that demonstrates that they have a reading score, a writing score, a listening score, and a speaking score. So all the English university pre-sessional courses must give 4 scores. So they couldn't just turn up to get their visa and go, well, I've done an integrated skills test and I got 90%. So it integrated all these skills. So I'm really prepared to study at university. It seems odd how customs officials determine the type of assessment that is done to allow students into university. That important gatekeeping test is decided by customs officials. It's bizarre. It's really hard. So if a student fails, just going back to this, say you've got a listening, reading, research, writing, speaking assessment. Say a student fails the writing section of that. It's kind of difficult to determine why did they fail that? Did they fail it because it was the listening? They didn't get the listening, or did they fail it because of the reading? Or are they just not good writers? So it can be difficult to figure that out. Right, here we go. Practicality, time can be an issue. Varied environmental test conditions. Testers often want to control the test conditions and have everything, have everyone having the same amount of time and doing the same test at the same time. And now it's kind of like, you're giving students free time. They can do other things, like they can form study groups and talk to each other and go to different additional sources and learn more about this topic. So, and suddenly the test conditions are no longer in the control of the tester. Reliability could be an issue, going back to this idea of subjective human raters again. So I've got some thoughts on that coming up. Standardization and training to get the raters, criteria and a rubric, and there could be plagiarism and cheating. So all of these are issues with an integrated skills test. Okay. Learning-oriented assessment. I would ask everybody, does you know what learning-oriented assessment is? But I'm kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to tell you what it is. Yeah, learning-oriented assessment. Sorry, I didn't hear. Okay, learning-oriented assessment requires a little bit of a shift in thinking. We all know that the main purpose of assessment is to measure students' performance. But with learner-oriented assessment, another purpose is added to that to promote learning. So in a way, it's one of the main aims of assessment is somehow to promote, to facilitate learning. So the approach is that all assessment, formal, informal, exams, assessment in class, quizzes, should contribute to learning. It aligns the curriculum, and by curriculum, I mean the syllabus, the materials, the teaching and the testing and the training. So it all aligns. It's all part of the one thing. It's not, here we have the teaching and the curriculum, and here we have the testing. It's all integrated. Cambridge ESOL, the guys, I think they changed their name to they called something else now. Cambridge ESOL have bought into this in a big way, and they argue that learning-oriented assessment emphasizes that all levels of assessment should contribute to both the effectiveness of learning and the evaluation of learning outcomes. And the British Council is very much into this as well. So this is not just a group of teachers saying, "Hey, it would be nice to use assessment to facilitate learning." This is large testing bodies embracing this as well. So how can you do it? What can you do? Well, to facilitate learning in the classroom, you can choose test task types that facilitate learning. Be transparent. Tell students what areas the test will cover and what questions will be on the test. And students will go and learn that. Show students the test before the test. Say, hey, here's the test. So imagine if you show students the test before they do the test. What are they going to do? They're going to run off and they're going to learn everything on the test. Well, that's good. They all won't get 100%. Let students take the test home the day before the actual test. This guy's gone.
Each you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Get students to write the test and use students' self-evaluation. During the assessment, give plenty of time. Make the test open book. Allow access to other sources. Hey, Chris, are you sure? I thought I had 45 minutes for this talk. I think I've got 45 minutes, not 30.
I'll have to check the schedule, sorry.
Okay,
I don't know what you do, I think.
You do have 45 minutes.
Yeah, I got 45 minutes.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
You worried me a bit there, Chris, because I was
Sorry.
no, that's
Okay.
cool. Let students ask questions. Yeah, so allow access to other sources, dictionaries and internet. So these days, when we have such a big issue with online assessment, and we're all worried about online assessment and students cheating, and I'm going to talk about that at the end. We're all worried about the students cheating and having access to extra sources. Make it open book, and then students can use dictionaries, their materials. They can use the internet. It's an open book test. It gets rid of a lot of headaches. Let students ask questions during the test. Use peer group and whole class assessment. And then after the assessment, this is something I used to do. This is something I used to do when I teach writing. So before I teach my students anything about writing, I give them a writing task to do, and it could be something over a week. And they write I give them some reading and listening, and they write this essay, and then I mark it in front of them, and I have the criteria there, and I give them a really bad score because I haven't taught them how to write, thesis statement, topic sentences, how to organize it, how to use references. So we go through the criteria, and they get a really bad score, and I go, okay, sorry guys, you've all failed this writing test. It's really sad. What can we do? And they always say, can we do it again? And I went, no, you can't do the test again. And they go, please, sir. And I go, okay then, I'll let you redo the test, but don't tell anyone. And do you want me to teach you how to do the writing? And they go, yeah, teach us how to write. And then I teach them how to write thesis statement and topic sentences and referencing and all that. And then I let them redo the test and bring up the old criteria that I've marked before and their old test, and I remark it. And of course, the score's way better. So that's what I mean by let students redo the test. Provide students with a lot of diagnostic feedback, direct students to additional learning resources, use the results of assessment to inform curriculum revision and teaching adjustments, and make learning more personalized and individual. That's one of the key things down the bottom. That's a pretty important point. Making learning personalized and individual. Right. I'm glad I don't have 1 minute left because I want to talk about rater bias. So I was talking about multiple measures assessment, authentic assessment, integrated skills, learning-oriented assessment. And with all this type of assessment, there is a greater emphasis on the subject of human rater, for sure. There's more tasks that require human raters, and the human rater and the task are worth way more percentage than before. So there's a really important need to make sure that rating is really reliable. We've got to eliminate rater bias. X defines rater bias down the bottom as a systematic pattern of rater behavior that manifests itself in unusually severe or lenient ratings associated with a particular aspect of an assessment situation. So the rater is biased in some way, and it causes them to be really severe or lenient. And it's not just the student's response or performance or script that's part of the marking. It's the rater's bias. So this is manifest in a number of different ways. And I started getting into this, and I find this whole thing quite interesting. First of all, there's leniency bias, and that's where you tend to rate too leniently. You rate too high. You're always rating high, okay? The opposite of that is strictness bias. You rate too harshly. And I'm the second one. I always rate too harshly. The good thing is I'm consistent. I rate consistently too high. So that's good, because you want to be consistent. Central tendency bias. I think everyone's guilty of this. This is the tendency of everyone to rate near the center of the rating scale. So I've just been doing a whole bunch of MSAT essays lately. And I think it goes to, does it go to 5 or 6? I think it goes to 6 maybe. So say it goes to 6. The central tendency bias means that everyone rates most scripts around 3 or maybe 2.5 or 3.5, but everyone hovers their grades around the central tendency, the central mark. Students really get a 6 or a 1. That's a bias that we're all, because we don't want to be too out and have our essays have to be remarked by someone else. So we play it safe. The halo effect is really interesting. In the halo effect, this is the tendency for a high rating on one part of the criteria. So say you're marking a writing and you mark for, and the criteria has content, organization, grammar, and vocabulary. The tendency of a high rating in one area, such as grammar. So say the student gets a really high mark in grammar, because of that, they get a high mark in everything else. Even if they didn't answer the question, their organization is lousy and their vocab's lousy, because they've got good grammar, they get a real high mark. The Horns effect's the opposite. So because they got a bad mark in grammar, in one criteria, there's a tendency to mark everything else low. And I'm often arguing with teachers about this during norming sessions, going, hang on, you've given the student a really low for content and organization, but look at it, it's really well organized and they answered the question. Sure, the grammar's lousy, but mark that according to the grammar. You can't, keep marking them down for grammar 3 or 4 times. So that's kind of interesting. And there's a few more here. There's the contrast effect bias. So the tendency to compare one performance with another performance. I've been guilty of this when I used to be an IELTS examiner. I remember going out in the middle of nowhere, like Dibber or something, and all the candidates would come in and they'd be all really low and you'd be giving, 3s and 4s and 3s and 4s. And someone would come in that was around about a band 5, and you get really excited and give them a 7 because you're comparing them to, not to the criteria, but comparing them to other candidates. There's a thing called first impression bias, and that was the tendency for a rating to be strongly influenced by the beginning of an essay or a presentation. And we're always susceptible to this. Yeah, we look at the introduction, go, well, this is good, and therefore the rest will be good. And when you look at it, and immediately you form in your mind, whether you want to or not. I do this all the time. I read the introduction, I read the first few words and go, this is a 6. You've already decided, and you go, actually, hang on, this is not a 6. I've just memorized some introductory statement. It's actually a 4. The opposite of that is the recency bias, where the most recent thing that you read or hear is you're majorly influenced by that. So the essay is rubbish, but they've got a brilliant conclusion. You go, well, that was quite good because that was the last thing that you remember. The similar to me bias is the tendency to rate higher someone that is similar to you. So, say I was doing a speaking exam with someone and they were a good-looking young New Zealand guy like myself. I go, oh, you're kind of like me, and I give you a much higher score. The opposite being you're dissimilar to me, you're not like me, I'm going to give you a lower score. So there's all these interesting biases left here. So Sotloff has identified a number of causes of these biases: not complying with the criteria, so just totally ignoring the criteria, or interpreting the criteria as you see fit, putting different weighting on the criteria. So you're looking at the criteria and you go, well, they've given 25% for grammar. I think that's too much. It's only worth 10%. And so you kind of weight the criteria differently. You don't like, thanks, Chris. You don't like the topic of the essay. That can cause people to be biased. Or the text type. You go, why students? This is not a very useful text type. My students have just been writing memos, and I could be biased against memos, thinking this is not very useful, and give low scores. Or the topic might not interest me. Disagreement with the content of what students write. So you might actually disagree with what the students are writing and go, no, I disagree with you, and not look at the criteria. They might use explicit language or say something offensive. I remember, sometimes when I was making an essay, and that someone would say something really sexist or racist, and I'd go, oh, no, that would really rate great with me, and I'd find it hard not to mark the person down for that. The sympathy score, the student, or you feel a bit sorry for them, they've tried really hard, so you give them a higher score, and knowing the writer is really problematic. It could be positive or negative. If you know them and you rate them higher, and if you don't know them, then and if you don't like them, you could rate them lower. And yes, Akina's good point there. Handwriting, massively influential. how to reduce it, be aware of the different types of rater bias behavior, be aware of your own rater bias. I'm trying to become better at that. Participate in training sessions. Training sessions are hugely important. Regular norming, standardization, and calibration session. Rating blind, that means not knowing who wrote the script, double raters, the use of moderation when the two raters are out, and having your rating monitored by a third party is vitally important. Sally's just asked a question. What do you think of student rater bias? I don't think much of that at all, Sally. I haven't thought about it at all. Stop asking such difficult questions. Now, Chris, do I have to stop and ask questions now, or can I quickly go through this minimizing cheating in online assessment? It's up to you guys.
I'd love for you to answer questions, but we're already taking into the time of another presenter. So
okay,
you have 1 minute to do whatever you want to do, but then I have to go on. Sorry, it's so interesting.
No problem. But I thought I had till 12:45.
Not according to the schedule I have.
Oh, okay.
There's somebody who should have started at 12:30. It's Ali Al-Mascari, who's been rescheduled.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Sorry.
Okay, let me just finish off by saying there's a number of different, because online assessment is proving to be, quite problematic for a number of reasons. Choose tasks that, such as, authentic tasks, integrated skills tasks that require drafting and feedback, and that will reduce the chance that students get outside help. Personalize and localize topics. Use a secure browser, like we use Respondus lockdown browser. There's a lot of things you can do before the exam to minimize cheating, during the exam, and after the exam. And these will be on the PowerPoint, which will be available to you guys to have, and we'll make this available to everybody. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for having to whip through the last little bit. I thought I had a little bit more time there. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Pete.
Thanks, Chris.
Hi, we have our next speaker is Ali Al-Mascari. Ali, are you